Towards the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, the linguistic influence through political expansion was already declining as England was losing its grip over its colonies. During this time, Britain's technological innovations and cultural legacies that it has left behind in colonies were more responsible for the spread of English. In the 20th century, English had another role to play. English was consolidated as a result of the mediating role that it had to play among the post-World War nations. League of Nations was formed after the First World War, and English was the co-official language with French. Many of the proceedings, in fact most of the proceedings of the League of Nations were carried out in English. Spread of English through colonial cultural legacies is not an unfamiliar idea for us, the Pakistanis. We can see that even after many years, almost 70 years now, that the British had left the subcontinent, we still have many signs of their cultural impact and the impact of their language on our everyday life as well as political and social lives. And then, as we've already said, that technological revolution was also responsible for the expansion and spread of English because the access to this knowledge was only possible with the help of English. Besides League of Nations, many other international bodies were also formulated in the subsequent years. In many of these organizations, English was either the sole official language or a co-official language. These organizations include Association of Southeast Asian Countries, European Union, European Council, North Atlantic, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, etc. In all these organizations where English is a co-official language, most of the proceedings and correspondence is done in English. There are other organizations where membership is restricted. For example, there are international bodies which are meant only for Arab countries. Similarly, there are international bodies which are meant, let's say, only for Spanish-speaking countries. Even in these countries, even in these organizations, English has a role to play because these organizations take out their statements or share their reports in the English language. There are many English-only organizations other than these political organizations and gatherings. For example, there are many scientific organizations which are English-only. Along with these scientific organizations, there are also many sports organizations which are English-only. So when these organizations meet, the lingua franca that they use is English. Similarly, when the countries which belong to these sports organizations, when they are at play in the playgrounds, then also the language that they use for communication with each other is English. English has a very different kind of role to play in the present day. English has become a language of protests. Even when a demonstration is being carried out in a non-English speaking country, the demonstrators and the protesters know that to get their voice heard or to get their message across, they have to put it in English. There are organizations which practice the right to use own language, for example, the European Union, where countries are free to use their own language during the proceedings of the organization. But even in such organizations, English plays a role of a relay language, which means that when a Finnish Greek translation or translator is not available, English is used to facilitate translation between Finnish and Greek in the way that Finnish will be translated into English and then that English will be translated into Greek. So in this way, English is still playing its role even in organizations which practice the right to use own language. Another important area which is responsible for the spread of English is travel. The USA, which is an English-speaking country, is the leading tourism earner and spender both, which means lots of tourists go to America and Americans also go out to other countries a lot. Presence of English can be felt on international travel everywhere. We see signs in the shops which are in English. All the notices are in English. Restaurant menus are in English. Credit card facilities are available in English. Often we see these comparatively poorer people selling mementos, etc., around restaurants. Even they manage to speak some sort of pidgin English to communicate with the travelers. And not only that, you might have experienced yourself that people would even beg money in English if you go on an international travel. So English has become the auxiliary language of international travel. We have all the safety instructions on the aeroplane, on a steamboat, etc. in English. All the important notices which are meant for guests in hotels, etc. are in English. Even the road signs in most of the countries of the world are in English. Another important source of spread of English is the military travel. Military travel is actually a euphemism for talking about military invasion. English is the easiest way to contact the English-speaking culture for the countries in which these armies go. These armies often introduce songs and music or English songs and music in the countries where they are posted. Often radio broadcasts are carried out in English, especially during the First World War. The radio broadcasts all over Europe were in English. In the present day, we see UNO peacekeeping missions in many parts of the world, especially in our neighboring Afghanistan. And this kind of contact is likely to introduce English to the native community. I remember when I was studying in England, I had an Iraqi student with me who was a pilot in Iraqi Air Force and had come to England for an English language course. And I remember he shared that he had learned most of his English from his American colleagues in the Air Force. So these travels that armies take for political purposes also help in the spread of English.